So you've thought about buying an older used pickup truck just for that occasional trip to Home Depot or for your kid to drive to high school, and you're concerned a little bit about the potential repair cost. Well, we're going to talk about that in this video, and the truck in particular we're going to talk about is a really common example of the exact kind of truck I just described. It's this 1993 Ford F-150. When we bought this truck, we knew that in addition to a handful of cosmetic issues like a broken window we've already fixed, some generic kind of paint damage, some clear coat peeling, and the occasional dent and ding that's not out of place on a truck that is 26 years old with 200,000 miles, well, 199,000 if you want to be technical, but aside from just general cosmetic condition, we knew it would need tires, and we knew it had one seemingly major issue, which I didn't think was going to be all that bad to fix. It idles at about 2,000 RPM. Yeah, that's a lot. I actually drove this thing down the driveway and down the street a little bit. I let my foot off the brake, and this is just where this truck is idling. That's a problem. It was on that test drive that something a lot of people are concerned about, unexpected repairs, actually happened and took place. When we got home, we discovered that during the maybe 4 or 5 miles we were out driving around on the dirt roads here near the house, the radiator had actually cracked and started leaking. Once we got the radiator out, as these jobs often do, we found out we had a few more issues. While the water pump isn't leaking, this heater hose connection here is extremely damaged, and I really don't like it. That alone wouldn't be enough for me to consider replacing the water pump, if not for the fact that it also appears the lower intake gasket has been leaking coolant right around here, right behind the distributor, and that's a problem. So to fix our intake cooling leak, we're going to have to remove both the upper intake and the lower intake and replace those lower intake gaskets. And since we're going that deep and doing the radiator and a thermostat and all the hoses in there, it just makes sense to go ahead and do a new water pump on here as well, especially considering the one fitting that is there is pretty damaged. And it's things like that that can cause these jobs to start to kind of snowball. So when you're removing one of these, either 5.0 or 5.8 upper intake plenums, there's an extra bolt you need to know about. You're going to find 5 half-inch head bolts around the outside, 2 at the front, 1 in the middle, and 2 at the back. But inside this hole here is a Torx bolt that, if you don't know about, can be a real problem. It's a T40 Torx, and you're going to need a bit in one of those socket holders and a long extension to get down in there and unscrew it. Now, fortunately, that bolt is not typically torqued super tight, so it should come out no problem with a 1/4 inch drive. Oh boy. This looks good. Yeah, that's a good thing. On this truck, even though we are selling it, one of the reasons I decided to go ahead and do all the labor to get in here and remove the lower intake is not only because of, this fire hazard here going on, but like a number of you folks pointed out in the comments on previous videos, there's a really good chance this intake gasket that goes between the upper plenum here and the lower plenum there, that is likely the cause of this thing idling at 2,000 RPM and having those drivability issues. So we've got to go ahead and do really 90% of the work in changing our radiator and removing this upper intake to do that gasket, it really wasn't that much more to go ahead and fix everything, so we can guarantee to the guy that's buying this, yeah, it's going to be able to drive across country. With older vehicles like this, even in a dry climate like we have, corrosion and rust is something you always want to be kind of concerned about and try to take precautions against. But we'll get a lot more in depth on that here in just a couple of minutes. Oh, you gotta be kidding. Not that one. Well, great. What do you think? Should we go for 4 for 4 on corner problems? Anti-seize, people. This is why almost every mechanic wishes the factories would just use more of it. We're experiencing exactly what a lot of people get concerned about when you start getting into an older pickup. Doing our radiator, cooling system, and these intake gaskets were not really a big job. I mean, a guy could knock them out in a day pretty easily. I just haven't had a whole day to give to this. But when we went to remove the lower intake bolts, all of our center bolts came out fine, but this one pulled the complete stud out. This one broke off. That one broke off, and that one came out. So each head has at least one broken off bolt in it that we're going to have to deal with once we get this manifold actually off. Here's what we've got. I've got one bolt broken off right there that you can see in the front of the head. And then I have a second bolt broken off right there in the back of the opposite head. Now you probably noticed, not only when I was removing that intake, but now with all the debris down in there, I wasn't overly cautious when I was taking it off. I could have prevented all that stuff from falling in if I'd taken a few extra steps. I didn't, because once those bolts broke off, the odds of me having to remove the heads from this engine regardless got really, really high. This front one might not be too terrible awful to get out, I don't think. I mean, there is a little more of it exposed and it's a little easier to reach, but that one still might need more than I can do to it in the truck. This one back here, not only is there a little bit more limited clearance between the firewall and where we need to be, that's going to be a little tight to get a drill or something in there, but I could manage it if I had to. But that one in particular, I'm seriously thinking that head's going to have to come off far. We'll have to see how that pans out, because right now we're going to start with some penetrating oil and let that soak. So subscribe if you want to see how this one ends. Thank you for watching, and more later. We had it running on starting fluid, but there was no fuel in it, so it wouldn't stay running. I've got a little bit of gas in this can. We're going to pour it in and just see if it'll run.